Terrorism is a very difficult word to define. And actually, we do spend a lot of time on this course thinking about whether it's actually possible to define terrorism. For instance, can terrorism be committed by states? Does terrorism have to be political? For instance, can we think about the drug wars currently raging in Mexico and across South America in terms of terrorism? Is terrorism ever useful? Does it always carry a negative connotation? Should we actually use the word terrorism, or should we just talk about political violence? These are the kind of questions that we'll be interrogating on this option pathway.
I teach a course, or co-teach a course, called Conceptualizing Violence, War and Terror, which students on the terror and terrorism pathway study in the first semester of their second year. In this course, we raise the question of whether or not war and violence can ever be justified, and if so, under what conditions they can be justified. There's a whole tradition that has been around for a couple of millennia, which argues that war can be just if it meets certain conditions, such as a just cause, a right intention, proportionality, and so on and so forth. So we critically investigate contemporary just war thinking. We critically deconstruct it. And well, I always try to encourage my students to actually not take for granted that such a horrible thing as war can potentially be just.
I teach a course on the second year of this option pathway where we look at terrorism historically. But we also use it to address a number of theoretical questions about terrorism. For instance, we think about, can states ever be terrorists? Is terrorism ever justified? What role does the media play in terrorism? How do we best fight terrorism? So we start looking at the French Revolution, and the French Revolution is the first time where we see this modern usage of terror. And we look at a number of other instances of state terrorism, for instance, the Soviet Union. But alongside this, we look at the way in which non-state actors have also used terrorism and the way in which they've justified the violence. We look at neoliberal terror, so we focus on the example of Chile in the 1970s and think about the different forms of terror that were enacted on the population there. We also study counter-terrorism measures, and we focus particularly on British counter-terrorism measures in Northern Ireland to think about what is justified in the fight against terror and what can't be justified.
Many people, politicians, journalists, academics as well, don't actually think about the implications, the moral implications, but also the real life implications of bombing people. People die in great numbers. People are maimed in great numbers. And this is all justified as part of the war on terror. We try to encourage our students to think critically about this. This is both a moral consideration. Can it ever be right to kill innocent people in the pursuit of an allegedly just cause? It's also a prudential consideration, however. What precisely should be the causal connection between dropping bombs and reducing or eliminating terror?
Barely a day goes by when terrorism isn't in the news. A whole raft of legislation has been passed that affects our everyday lives, even within universities. It's therefore vital that we really understand terrorism. And on the option pathway, we look at the phenomena from both a historical and a philosophical perspective to gain a far deeper understanding of the role that terrorism plays in the world today.